Best advice for a CISO. Go.
So when you move from a technical role to a CISO, your thought process has to change from what you do to why you do it. And let me tell you a little story about that. I was having just a simple conversation with a very non-technical person, and this person asked me what I do, and my reaction was, well, I do cybersecurity. I answer a bunch of emails and I go to a bunch of meetings. He could tell it was a little weird, so he asked me in a different way. He goes, why do you do what you do? And that completely changed the conversation into probably one of the best conversations I've had about cybersecurity. And we both came out of that with some really valuable insight. I mean, he shared with me after the fact that he's got a better understanding of cybersecurity. And I've got a completely different approach to being a CISO because I found my why. And I'd like to make a quick shout out to Simon Sinek because I did a lot of research after this discussion about that. And so my advice is to find an aspiring CISO or a young CISO and ask them what they do and record the answer. Then ask them why they do it and see if that tone changes. If the tone doesn't change or become a kind of a spirited discussion, then that person might not be really passionate about what they do or ready for what they do.
It's time to begin the CISO Series podcast.
Welcome to the CISO Series podcast. My name is David Spark. I am the producer of the CISO Series, and joining me as my co-host, you've heard him on the other show. Now he's on this show, but he's done this show plenty of times. His name is Steve Zalewski. Steve, say hello to the audience.
Hello, audience.
You'll hear him say that. No, he won't say that. You'll hear the voice is what you'll hear throughout the show. We're available at CISOseries.com, where you can find all of our programming. If you haven't checked it all out, you should. Like, why not Steve's show, Defense in Depth? It's awesome.
Yes, it is. It's the best. Come on.
Except this one they're listening to right now. At this very moment, this is the best. Our sponsor for today's episode is Tines, the smart, secure workflow builder. Tines, more about just that a little bit later in the show. Steve, there is a super hot button issue that is going on around offices, which is often not how a lot of security programs have been built lately, I will say lately, and that is the forced return to office. There are a lot of obvious pros and cons, but man, a lot of people have really gotten used to the work from home, haven't they?
Oh, yes.
This is a tough one to put back in the bottle, isn't it?
Yes, there is a lot of reticence to have to go back in. The commutes, the inconvenience, the issues, what I call the tissue paper issues are just coming out everywhere. It is a white storm of problems.
But I will say this, two things. I think this is mainly for growing talent and also for the youngest people in your organization. It's a coordinating. This is my theory. I think about myself outside of college. If I had to do work from home, which I'm sure many of our listeners have to, that would be really depressing. It would have been awful. And I don't know how much I would have learned for that matter. I think this is critical for that age group and growing them within the organization to make them successful. I don't know how much they can learn from work from home and not having that sort of training on site. Steve, what do you think?
Yes. And training isn't just an educational exercise, right? It's a social exercise.
Yes.
And that's, I think, where people are going is through COVID, right? We kind of deprecated the whole social maturity interaction as to how that foundationally establishes who you are from the business perspective of getting the job done. And I think people realize there's a big gap there. And a lot of business now is basically saying, we acknowledge that gap and we want to address it. But many in the industry simply say, yeah, but it's too inconvenient for us. It's like cybersecurity, right? It's a friction that I don't think I need, but I don't necessarily understand what I'm missing by not doing it.
Very good point. Well, enough of this discussion because we had a lot of other great discussions coming up on this show. And I'm very excited to bring on a guest who I just met at a big Avanta conference here in Del Mar. Thrilled to have him on board. It is the CISO for Dot Foods, none other than Brett Perry. Brett, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave and Steve. I really appreciate you guys creating such an invaluable podcast for the cybersecurity community, and I am truly honored to be a guest.
As a CISO, what do you think about this?
Should cyber insurance carriers offer MDR, Managed Detection and Response Services? Now, that question got thrown out by Peter Schwacker of Nearshore Cyber on LinkedIn after seeing the provider Beasley getting in on the market, that being MDR. Is offering both cyber insurance and MDR services a great example of vertical integration, or could it be a conflict of interest? So IT consultant Eric Silberman surmised, quote, I guess what the, quote, fire department wants most is if you never to have a fire in the first place. And if they have to come to your house to do a personal inspection, then so be it. Win-win, I suppose. Not everyone was on board. Others didn't like the idea of MDR being moved into an insurance checkbox category. Steve, where do you stand? I think this is kind of an interesting debate here.
So to me, it comes down to the conflict of interest. If the MDR goes into insurance, okay, then are they cooking the books, which is the cost of the insurance relative to the value of the insurance now going to change because we've lost that competitive edge for the MDRs to compete on price and insurance? But ultimately, I actually agree. I think they should integrate it, because having the fire department come out and see if you've got fire alarms, seeing if you have a hydrant nearby, that is going to positively impact the insurance rates that you pay, because overall we have a better preventative perimeter, right, to prevent the event. And then if the event does happen, higher likelihood that people survive. So I look at the greater good and say, definitely we should be pursuing that.
But isn't that firehouse example, wouldn't that just be like the example of an audit, though? I mean, an MDR is like full-blown service. It's more than that. That's like the fire department coming and literally putting out the fires for you should you cause one.
Well, you could argue who's going to do it better? Somebody that knows your house, that's looked at it, that knows how many rooms you are, that knows where your kids' bedrooms are. So when they come to the house, they already know the layout and they know what to do.
Good point.
To be able to help you survive through the event. Okay. As opposed to simply saying, no, it's not your interest. I'm just going to shop you for price. And then when I need you, all of a sudden there's potentially a lot of misrepresented expectations.
All right. I throw this to you, Brett. What's your thought on this?
My first reaction to this was this is like a car insurance company asking you to plug a telematics device into your car to get discounts, right?
Oh, yeah.
To reward good driving habits. I can only tell you that I'm a really good driver, never had a ticket or an accident. Yet if an insurance company knew my driving habits, my premiums would go through the roof.
Well, they may know it now that you mentioned on the podcast.
Yeah. I won't mention what insurance company that is, but it kind of harkens back to the old days of PCI compliance, right? And some cybersecurity departments are being a compliance shop, right? They're just checking the boxes. They're going through the pages and going, oh, we need SIM, we need this, we need that. And just checking a box and not really following up with fully deploying the product and utilizing the product correctly. Right now, we see insurance companies going from like a 2 or 3 page questionnaire. Now they're 20, 25, 30 pages long. It's ridiculous. So I see a lot of companies, or I'd like to warn a lot of companies not to try to just get cyber insurance, right? Because they're going to do what they got to do to get cyber insurance. What they need to do is build a good cybersecurity program, and the compliance and the insurance will follow at normal rates.
But here's the challenge with that. Chicken or the egg came first, okay? How do I build a good security program if the business isn't interested? Whereas if the insurance companies tell the business, you need to have a reasonably good security program for you to be able to get the rates and the coverage you want, which one carries the larger argument?
That's a great question. I think your business has to be dedicated to actually building good security. If they're just wanting to be compliant, then that's what, I would probably find another company to work for because you're not going to be there long.
What's the starting point for a CISO?
Are cybersecurity teams the pot calling the kettle black when it comes to technical debt? CISOs will be the first to tell you that legacy IT introduces risk as it ages. But as Erica Tchaikovsky pointed out in CISO Online, there's less awareness about technical debt on the security stack itself. Just like other parts of IT, cybersecurity teams are so busy using their current tooling to face evolving threats that the time and money to upgrade can seem daunting. So I'll ask you, Brett, what are some strategies you've seen work in tackling technical debt within the security stack?
So this being my third build from the ground up.
Oh, wow.
Fortunately, I don't have to deal with a lot of security technical debt. Now, a lot of these companies are really, really old, so they've got a lot of other technical debt, but I don't really inherit much of that. But here are some of my strategies. Never buy another tool or technology until the previous purchase is fully deployed.
That's a good point. Oh my God. That is such an obvious good point that I'm sure nobody pays attention to.
No, I mean, if you're given the budget, you're just going out and buying whatever you can. But I don't allow that next tool to even be talked about until the last tool is fully deployed, because the tech debt will actually pile up pretty quickly if it just becomes shelfware, right?
Right.
So the other approach is once the security program is fully established, my approach becomes one in, one out. So security architect, you want another tool to do this, but what's going to go? Because security changes year to year. And so
do you keep a balance of tools? Like, making up a number, like say you have 15, 20 tools in your environment. This whole philosophy is if you want a new tool, what are we getting rid of?
Yeah. I mean, consolidating is good too. Obviously, I don't want to have all of my eggs in one basket,
right?
But I am willing to consolidate a few things that my team thinks that they could.
But that's a really interesting philosophy because it forces you to look back as you want to look forward at the same time. I do like that take. All right, I'm going to go to you, Steve, on this one. How have you dealt with technical debt? And by the way, have you walked into a situation where you that whole stack was there when you walked in?
Yes, a couple of times, but I'm going to differentiate technical debt from technical obsolescence, because I think for cybersecurity tools, it's not that we're building tech debt. It's that our security perimeter is adapting, right? Our threats are adapting. And oftentimes some of the technology we bought, even 12 or 18 months later, is the wrong tool based on the threats that we're trying to address. And so therefore, it's the obsolescence of that control compared to the new ones I have to put in. And so oftentimes then I've only deployed 25% of the tool, but it's run its course. I now have to move somewhere else. Let's get rid of it. And the ability to flush tools out of an infrastructure, okay, it turns out to be the harder thing, right? And so therefore the tech debt builds because we simply don't have the maturity to push them out, because the finance guys have said, wait, that was a 36-month contract and you're only 18 months in, right? And I don't want to throw away the money. Whereas I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't do me any good anymore. Just write it off, because my job is to protect my company, not to just efficiently, right, manage the costs.
Yeah, this loss fallacy that is often happens.
There you go. There's the fallacy, right? So I go, that's actually, I think, closer to the truth.
All right.
That's why I think 3-year deals are great, because it's probably not so good for the technology, because if you're willing to rip them out, but if you start looking at that technology 2.5 years down the road and say, well, we should probably go to something else, it lets you refresh. It makes you look at that technology, make sure that they're not falling behind, right? They're actually developing the product. You don't get into re-signing a 3-year deal. You always have to constantly take a look at that technology and possibly get rid of it. So my last point is to never get to a point where one product or vendor is too hard to rip and replace.
Okay, well, get into the details, because I personally had an experience with that, and I did the painful Band-Aid rip.
It's difficult. I mean, identity for one thing, right? It becomes so ingrained in the business, and you've got HR involved, you've got all these parts of the business that are involved, and identity's become one of those technologies that gets you kind of stuck. And how would you even figure out how to rip and replace or even move towards another one without buying that product a year or two in advance, or at least getting hopefully 12 to 24 months of free product, right? Until you're able to replace that. It's hard. My only advice is if you find yourself in that situation, you got to actively work on an exit plan and figure out, because you don't want to be stuck.
Now, this is the thing that I have done. Like, it's a simple thing is I just, like, if I'm using any tool that makes me put data in, I just want to know that I can export it fully out, which I've had tools that don't let me do that. What is the question to ask up front to know that you have an exit plan?
Who owns this data is one question, right? And that should all come out in the contract language, right?
Right.
Because if I'm giving you a bunch of data, or this is a cloud app, I want to make sure that I can recover all that data and move it into a new technology if I need it. That's a conundrum for sure.
Before I go any further, I do want to tell you about our spectacular sponsor, and that would be Tynes. Security teams are facing a constant uphill battle between alert fatigue, repetitive manual tasks, endless false positives, inflexible technology, and the looming risk of burnout. It all adds up, making it tough for teams to stay ahead of threats. Every day, valuable hours are spent sifting through noisy alerts and managing rigid workflows instead of tackling the real security issues that matter. It's draining, and over time, it can start to impact even the most dedicated teams. That is where Tynes comes in. Built by security practitioners for security practitioners, Tynes is an orchestration and automation platform designed to meet the demands of security teams. Tynes empowers analysts and engineers to automate their most repetitive, time-consuming tasks regardless of complexity. No coding experience required, just the flexibility to tailor workflows to your team's exact needs. The result? Companies like McKesson, Canva, and Mars are saving hundreds, even thousands of hours on manual tasks, allowing them to focus on impactful work and real-time decision-making. So if your team is ready to trade burnout for breakthroughs and tackle threats without unnecessary noise, visit Tynes.com/CISO series. Yes, go to that site, TINES.com/CISO series. Tynes, because security work should empower, not exhaust.
It's time to play What's Worse?
It's time to play What's Worse. There he goes. Listen to the noise of Steve Zalewski not looking forward to playing a game. Do you, like, when you play games with your family, you go, is that the noise you make, Steve? Monopoly.
I don't want to lose. This is hard. I'm like,
there's no losing in this game. That's just me criticizing you.
Steve, has anybody ever agreed with you on your answer?
On what's worse?
We're going to find out. I don't remember what your odds are on this game, but here we go. And just so you know, Brett, I always make the co-host, this case Steve, answer first, so you get a little bit more time to decide if you want to agree or disagree with Steve. All right?
All right.
This comes from Nadav Lotan with Cisco, and here are the two scenarios. Okay, so you have a situation of a costly expert or limited automation. Here we go. The costly expert. Your organization opts for a high-quality manual penetration testing and validation program conducted by renowned experts. These testers provide in-depth assessments that mimic real-world attacker behavior, thoroughly probing your modern application stacks. However, this level of expertise comes with a hefty price tag, consuming a significant portion of your security budget. Additionally, you must place immense trust in the pen tester's skills and integrity, as their findings directly influence your security posture. Due to cost and resource constraints, these tests are infrequent, potentially leaving vulnerabilities unaddressed between assessments. Okay. So some parts good, some parts very bad. Now, the limited automation. Alternatively, you rely solely on automated penetration testing tools. These tools offer quick results and are cost-effective, but they are highly scoped and lack the sophistication to emulate real-world attackers. They struggle with modern application stacks, especially those involving microservices, cloud-native applications, and complex integrations. Might as well just describe everybody's environment right there. The tools miss nuanced vulnerabilities and multi-step exploits, providing a superficial assessment that could lead to a false sense of security. So essentially what you got is some really good pen testing with very little that you can do with it with the money you got left, or crappy pen testing with a lot of money left over. Steve, what's worse?
I would go with it's much worse to pay a very expensive expert to give me a one-time view that's good for 365 days but is obsolete in day one. That's way worse than me having a limited automated view of an enforceable perimeter.
All right. Brett?
Well, I hate to break the cycle, and I think you actually convinced me to go the other direction, Steve. But yeah, I was originally going to say the automated testing
Is worse, B.
Yeah, I was. Well, yes, but I'd have to go the other way because you're absolutely right. That data is only as good as the day that they print the report out. And so, and the remediation steps that you got to take. The only other thing I would do is probably have to increase pen tests from once a year to twice a year. But
You probably won't have the budget to do that.
yeah, I mean, nothing can replace a good human doing pen testing, though. It just doesn't. I would almost be willing to pay it every year if the business would give that to me. But
So you're both agreeing that the first scenario is worse because it's just a one-time situation.
Is worse. And what I would say is remember the two key principles for security, which was be brilliant at the basics and automate, automate, automate. And so I'm just applying that to say I'd rather have a limited perimeter that I can consistently monitor and report on than have a one-time brilliant report that means nothing to me the next day.
Yeah, but hold it. But I argue that comment right there. You one-time brilliant report that has true insight into your environment doesn't vanish the next day. It's not as accurate the next day, but it still has a lot of validity and gives you a lot of wisdom into your space. Where the second scenario is like, who knows?
Except that the second case has given me automation capability in a limited sense to continuously monitor and report.
Right, but it also, my other fear of even with all this money you got left over, you're not going to be spending it correctly at all at that point. What do you think?
So here's the key. Do I want to have no money and bet all of my company on one egg, one basket, or do I want to have money to be able to have that debate and give myself the opportunity to do better or worse? And I'd rather take the extra money and have the chance to see what I can do the other 364 days.
Sounds good. Brett, where do you stand?
best case scenario, you pay a ton of money the first year, and then you just follow it up year after year with automated testing.
There you go.
And don't change anything.
There you go. The best of both worlds.
Yeah, as long as the bad guys agree with me, right? And as
Right.
long as the lines of business do what I tell them to do, this is a phenomenal strategy.
This is just as long as everyone listens to Steve. The new name of the podcast.
What works? What's not working?
If it's such a struggle to hire good staff, why don't we talk more about employee retention? It seems to be an industry-wide problem. So a recent ISACA survey found that 55% of respondents had trouble retaining qualified cybersecurity staff. Why are they not holding on to staff? So recruitment from other companies was a big reason, but respondents also cited poor financial incentives, limited career development, and high stress levels. As a CISO, there's not much you can do about recruitment, but I feel like improving the other three factors make recruitment a lot harder. Brett, you told me that you haven't had any staff turnover in years. What's been your secret to holding on to talent?
So I would like to say that I am the secret. I am the special sauce here, but I will give it up to Dot Foods, who truly has a great culture.
Mm-hmm.
I did poll some of my longest standing direct reports, and that was the first thing that they came back to me with is I'm here because of Dot's culture.
So, and before you go any further, can you just give me a couple little insights? What is integral to Dot's culture?
Well, so one thing is in 64 years, they've never had a layoff or a reduction in force.
That's insane. Seriously?
Huge. And so, yeah, just one quick story during COVID, where 80% of our business is food service. So restaurants, food away from home. And overnight, 60% of our business was shut off overnight. And the business basically said, or the leadership basically said, the last thing on the table is layoffs, knowing that once the COVID fog lifted, we would be back to business as normal. And the last thing that they wanted to do was to have to go out, rehire, retrain everybody. And it, sure enough, it lifted, and it was pretty turbulent. But when we came out of it, we came out stronger than we came in, because
that's huge.
People weren't afraid of losing their jobs. Everybody just felt confident in the business. And the other thing is the transparency, that this is a family-owned business, and they provide a lot of transparency into how the business is doing. Every period, every quarter, we get an exact picture of how that business is doing, good or bad. So we can expect our bonus is going to be good this year, or how are possible increases in pay or whatever. We know that that's coming, and we don't just wait for it once a year.
All right, Steve, retention. This is a hot button issue, because especially like in the Bay Area, where people are constantly fighting for talent, it can get very, very expensive, especially if you hire someone young, train them for 5 years, and they leave, and now they're very much a hot commodity on the market.
So this is where I say to a CISO, when I talk with them or mentor, I go, are you a good manager or are you a good leader? Okay. Are you managing your organization for short-term efficiency, or are you leading your organization to show the business how you can effectively grow? Right. And it's kind of what we talked about here with the private company, which is, to the degree that you can create an environment and principles that people want to work there, as opposed to they get frustrated, and so therefore it becomes a financial compensation exercise. Okay, you lose the battle. It only goes so far. You can only lead for so long, right? Because eventually, if there is no career path for individuals, or you've asked a lot of them and they just get tired of being a level 1 analyst because it just burns them out, right? Then that's what I said, good leadership then becomes some good management on career guidance, okay? Career development, mentoring, so that you're blending the two. But ultimately, I say, if you're a good, strong leader and set a vision, and people feel like they are part of the solution, okay, that you have the best likelihood of longer term retention.
That's actually a really good point. And we hear this a lot. It's that people want to be trained within their company. They want the company to invest in their own growth professionally. I'm assuming you see this with your own staff, Brett. Yes?
Absolutely. One of the other items that was brought up is that I don't force the people to train. At least once a year, get some outside training, go to a conference, network, because that becomes invaluable. When I got to DOT, they were kind of in a bubble. They're in the middle of Illinois, and it's a very small town. So people really didn't want to travel to those big conferences or travel for training. And now that I've got those people getting out every year, it's paying dividends for DOT Foods, and it's also paying dividends for their professional growth.
The other thing I'll say to that is, like when we were at Levi's, I was gently warned more than once, poaching out of other parts of the company is not appreciated. Okay. And I would simply say, look, good cybersecurity people don't necessarily come from a cybersecurity background. And so I would put my cybersecurity folks into the business as business information security officers to let them mingle with the business and grow. But I also found good PMs and good others in the business that liked cybersecurity, and the skills were cross-trainable. And I will encourage them to be my advocates. And then all of a sudden, when positions open, they're coming across. Again, as a leader, look at the message you're sending, which was, not only am I willing to train you, okay, but training you about how to run the business. Okay. And from the business perspective, bring you into cybersecurity is hugely powerful as people want to work through their career growth path.
I've got a couple of other points, Dave, on this, how I'm trying to retain people. One is absolutely provide a work-life balance. people in cybersecurity need to know that this is not a 9-to-5 job. You don't have to be at your desk 8 hours a day, right? But one rule I have is when the bell rings and the stuff hits the fan, it's all hands on deck for as long as we need you, right? So kiss the spouse goodbye, kiss the kids goodbye until this thing is resolved. And everybody understands that. That's my first rule when you come onto my team is you go take the kids to the doctor's appointments and pick them up from school and do the things that you can't do over the weekend. Get that stuff done, but understand when it goes down, everybody's on deck.
Why is everyone talking about this now?
Quote, what Gartner giveth, Gartner can take away, end quote. Now, this is what Gartner that coined the acronym SOAR back in 2017, but now its latest hype cycle for Information Technology Service Management, or ITSM, put it at the very bottom of the trough of disillusionment. But as Rob Lemos, who said the opening quote here of Gartner giving and taking away, pointed out in Dark Reading, most organizations want a single hub for all their security information, but that hub doesn't have to be SOAR. Gartner makes the case for SOAR being on the way out, saying that its components have been subsumed into other services and automation is now just an expected product feature, like AI is in everything now. So to paraphrase a bard, have we come to bury SOAR, not to praise it? Is Gartner right to put it out to pasture? And I'll ask you, Steve, and why do we keep letting Gartner define our industry like this? What's the situation here with SOAR?
So the one thing is we'd have to give Gartner credit where credit is due, which was being able to run an entire industry on acronyms was a stroke of genius, okay? That they got us all to be idiot savants to what acronym do you fit into? And I, as a security practitioner, are now deciding whether to buy you, okay? Mm-hmm. But be that as it may.
Yeah, because everyone has a spreadsheet with a series of acronyms on the line items.
You got it, right? And we can thank Gartner for that. Now, here's the key. Things like SOAR, right, which was service automation, to be able to let the machines run at machine speed, okay, was a good idea. And they thought that if I look at people, process, and technology, it was primarily a technical issue. And so therefore they created a category and a bunch of companies went off and built some technology. But what we all came to realize was it was a people and business process problem. It was not a technology issue that ultimately was what prevented it from succeeding, okay? And so the trough of disillusionment was the technology in and of itself wasn't capable, right, of meeting the expectations. And now we've moved forward to security mesh and an appreciation that it isn't just if I can take a look at a run book and what a level one analyst does, that I can automate 90% of that task, okay? Eyes on glass, and what's going on between the ears is an AI, Gen AI conversation that just requires more innovation and engagement with the business process to get where we need to be. And so I would simply say, yes, SOAR has passed, but we never really understood why. They just simply said it didn't meet the need. And there's where the accountability in my mind needs to be laid firmly at the feet of Gartner.
All right, Brett, your take on SOAR. Is it, by the way, do you have a SOAR line item on your spreadsheet?
I do not. And the reason is because our MDR takes care of all of that stuff for us. So
there you go.
One of the things that I did, the first thing I was like, I do not want to buy a SIM because I don't have a bunch of full-time employees to be able to run this thing. And in the past, it's never really been effective anyway. But the point with Gartner that I want to make is I'm okay with them helping define our industry more than I'd like the industry to define the industry. So the technology industry can come up with this real cool new idea, right? And they define the direction based on how cool this new shiny product is. But the thing with CISO, and full disclosure, I do hold a CISO license with Gartner. So they take a lot of input from CISOs by going through, we take surveys and going to conferences. And they also provide valuable tools to us for use and benchmarking against our peers. So I would rather see Gartner define that than the cybersecurity technology people.
Very good. Well, that brings us to the very end of the show. Thank you so much, Brett. That was fantastic. Loved having you on. So glad you could make it onto the show. And Steve, thank you for stepping up as co-host for this episode. Huge thanks to our sponsor, and that is Tines. Go to Tines.com/CISO series to learn how you can trade burnout for breakthroughs. Save hours, hundreds, even thousands of hours with your security team. Any last thoughts about today's conversation? Steve, you first.
Really appreciate the thoughtfulness, Brett. You brought up some really good points that I think really expanded on the conversation. But I want to thank Tines because this whole conversation today, these components, I think continue to gnaw at the industry at large, right? And so the more that we periodically review this is really our opportunity to not just continue to do what we've done, but to realize what we need to do different.
Excellent. Any last thoughts from you, Brett?
Yeah, just one last thought. If you're a young CISO or an aspiring CISO, I would advise you to find a mentor that's been around for a while and take the advice that they have. Most of them will drop what they're doing to give you any advice or answer any questions that you guys have. You guys are not alone. I know it seems like, when you take that new job as a CISO, you seem like you're out there all alone, but there are lots of people out there ready to help. So please reach out and take that advice.
Very good tip to close it out. And I love your opening tip. Ask yourself the why, not the what about your job. All right. Thank you. As always, we greatly appreciate your contributions. And by the way, send me in more what's worse scenarios and listening to the CISO Series podcast.
That wraps up another episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. We have lots more shows on our website, CISOseries.com. Please join us on Fridays for our live shows, Super Cyber Friday, our virtual meetup, and Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. This show thrives on your input. Go to the Participate menu on our site for plenty of ways to get involved, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@CISOseries.com. Thank you for listening to the CISO Series podcast.